So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to take data like this, either in a different tab or in a different spreadsheet, and then pull it through to a tab like this, and then be able to filter the data based on that criteria that you select, and also show you how to implement a more flexible solution that also allows you to search to get just the data that you need. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So if we have our data here, we're going to create a new tab. And if you don't have one, you can just click on this plus button to add a sheet. If you already have it, then what we're going to do is we're going to take these columns, and I'm just going to copy and paste them over here. I'm going to drop down a couple rows just to give myself room for this. And then you can either just paste to have that format if you have format, or you can do values only if you want to do a separate format. So we're just going to do that and do a quick color here. And then what we're going to do here then is create a filter formula. We're going to go select our data here, and then I'm going to drop this end reference, comma, and then the column that we want to filter by. So in this case, we're going to demonstrate by sales rep. And again, I'm going to drop the end reference. So you can put the ending row on these, but you have to make sure your ranges are the same, that you have the same number of rows. So if you start in 2, make sure all the other ones start with 2 as well. And so in this case, let's go ahead and just match to Katie. And we can see that we get all the results matching Katie. So we can kind of adjust these columns if we want. Better reflect the width of the data, something like that. And so you can see here what's happening is we're looking in this column C and then matching everything that is equal to Katie. And so we can simply adjust this text and see those results accordingly. So next, let's take it out of this cell. But before we do, let's look at one other scenario. What happens if your data isn't in this spreadsheet, but in a different one? And so let's just posit that scenario for a second. So if our data here is empty and we have this data over here, we want to create this data pull tab. So we could create this filter and reference this directly using import range, but the way I typically prefer to do it is using a intermediary tab. You can call it data, you can call it wherever you need to. And then what you need from here is either just this ID part, which is after this D / and before edit, view, whatever that is. So you can get just this ID, or you can grab this whole thing, including the link. For some people, this is just simpler because then you can find that and bring it in. And then over here, we're going to do import range, a double quote. We'll put in that URL. And then we just need to get that tab and range. And so this would be, again, A2 to F. So in that data tab, A2 to F, close that out. And then the only thing you have to do next is make sure you allow access. And it will ask that unless you have public view, which I don't recommend doing. And so now you can see we have this import range, pulling that data from this source data sheet. And so that's how you can sync it up if you have it in a different spreadsheet altogether. All right, so let's go ahead and reset this to how we had originally, and then continue on with our filtering. But before we do that, let's go ahead and set up some name ranges and see how that can simplify things. So we can just select, for example, this data set, and I'm going to hold down Control and then click on this top row. And then what I'm going to do is just add a name range here. I'm going to call this one data. And then I'm just going to make sure I set these columns as well in there. And then I can add some more. And so I can do it either from here or in here. I can just select these, drop that top one. And then I can actually just type over here as well. And so the only thing to keep in mind is you can't use a space. So if you need a quote unquote space, you can use like a underscore or just put them next to each other like that using camel case. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it like that and then call this sector, call this payment, and we'll just call this amount. And then let's grab this one as well, call it date. And now over here, we can change this and we can call this data, and we can call this sales rep. And you can see when you start typing, those show up there. And now this will give us the same thing. The advantage of this is it makes it quick and easy to tell what these are referring to because we have named them. So let's go ahead and set up a couple things here so we can do some selections. So for example, instead of typing in the sales rep name, what if we put it up here? So what we could do instead of referring to it here is we could just make a reference to that cell and we can see the same thing. Now if we change it to Katie, for example, then it shows up like there. The only challenge with this is, let's say we accidentally add a space. You can see that it changes there. Or what if we did the wrong spelling? Then it doesn't work like that. And so what we can do here then is we can actually add a drop down and grab this data. And so this would be that sales rep data. And then you can see those options are populating there. Change this to an arrow. And let's just call this sales rep. And now we can select and we can see those showing up just like that. So that makes a very quick and easy way to filter by sales rep. So what if we want to filter by multiple criteria? What if we want Katie's, but we also want certain sectors? So we can just do the same thing and keep building this out. So let's add sector, payment, and then maybe here in a second, we'll add start date, end date, and then maybe min amount and max amount. And we can use that for our references. So this is going to be very similar to our sales rep. So we can just do the same thing, right click, drop down from a range. And I'm going to click on this, click in this just to keep that clicking consistent. Sometimes it will bump you out if you don't do it correctly. So we're going to do this, drop that in reference, hit OK. And I'm going to come change this again from a chip. I just like the arrows better. If you like the chips, you can leave it with the default. And so now we have these options, so we could select one, but we haven't tied it in yet, so nothing's happening here. And so all we have to do here is on the filter, you can just do comma and another condition. So if we do comma, we can do sector, and there's that sector equals to B2. And now it's both Katie and that sector. So if we pick a different one, you can see that happens just like that. And then we'll do the same thing for payment. And again, add it here with another comma. Payment equals to B3. And now you can see it's using all three of these as filters on our data. And then we can add our start and end date. So on these two, I'm going to do a drop down, but this time I'm going to use is valid date instead of a regular drop down. Input, done. Now what this allows me to do is double click and select a date. Now this data is from 2023, so maybe I'll just type it in. And so I can do something like 6/1/2023, and we could do 9/1/2023. And then we just need to integrate this into the formula as well. So now we're going to do a comma again, date. And this time we can do greater than or equals to this date. So let's see what that looks like. So I already got rid of those. And then we can do this again to get the less than or equals to our end date. And there you can see now it's doing that as well. Now if we double click on one of these, we can scroll forward, maybe go to the end of the year. You can see it brings that back in. And so the final filter we're going to show you is the min and max. So what if we only wanted to show a minimum of 10,000 and maybe a max of 20? So now we can do, again, another filter. We'll call this amount greater than or equals to our min, and then amount less than or equals to our max. And then finally, there we can see that. So we could change this to 0, and it brings in those. We could make it 8,000. It should get rid of that 2 and that 6, just like that. All right, so that's the basics of doing a quick filter there. And in this case, we're using the filter function to make those distinctions. Now, the one issue with this is, let's say we didn't want to select that sector. So if I deselect this, if I wanted to see all, for example, now we have this issue where it says no matches are found. There's a couple ways we could handle this. We could do some if statements here and say if sector is blank, then we have one filter, and if the other one's blank, do another one. So for example, we could say if B1 is equal to blank, we do one filter. The issue is we have so many different ones here. This is going to get really overwhelming to try to factor for all those different conditions. The best way to approach this is to use something called query. And so I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this. We'll rename this and call this filter. And then let's rename this one, and we're going to call this one query. So what I'm going to show you here is using the query. It's actually pretty simple to do this. Go a little bigger here, and then let's go ahead and build this. We have, again, our filter here. Now, when we come to our query, those name ranges aren't going to be super helpful, but I'm going to show you how we can put this together. So query, we do the same thing. We can pull in data. And then we could do, say, select all. This asterisk means all, where, let's say, A is not null. And that just means where column A is not blank. And so that's going to bring in all of our data from here. Now, we could do the same thing like we do with the filter. And we could say, and C is equal to Katie. And there you can see, just like we did with our first condition on our filter, we got that sales rep. Now, if we want to tie it to this, instead of in the formula like this, then what we do is instead of that, we do two double quotes. So those single quotes are for the string, and then we have to escape it to reference the cell. So it's a little funky in regards to filter, but we can do those two ampersands and then make a reference to the cell there. And now we're acting like we did with the filter. And so I can make these selections and go through that. Now, this also still has the same issue. If we delete it, then we have back to square one. Now, the difference with query is because this is a string, if you're very familiar with Google Sheets, you can concat things. So just like we had that ampersand. And so what we can do here is actually add a little case here to add more to this string if these are selected. And so that gives us a much more streamlined way to do this. So I'm going to do Control Enter just to move that to the next line. And then what I'm going to do here is and if B1 equals to blank, do nothing. Otherwise, here's our string. And so this is where we're going to say, and make sure I add a space here, and C is equal to, and then I can do my double quotes. So I could do Katie here. And at this point, it's again, not super useful because it's not referring to that other one, but I can escape this again, do my double ampersands and do my cell. And there we go. So now let's check this out and see if this is any more resilient. So if I delete Katie, you can see this is actually still working. And now it's bringing in all the sales reps. So this cool little trick allows you to dynamically select whether you have it selected. Instead of, in this case, once you delete one of these, then it no longer works. And so let's go ahead and go through building the rest of these. So sector and payment work the same way. And so I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to do Control Enter, and then I'm going to build these. So 2 and 3, and then change that to 2 and 3, and then this will be D and E. And so now if we pull this up, we can see we got technology and cash. And if we add this, you can see now it's filtering by that as well. So let's look at the other ones of these. So dates is a little more complicated, but I'll show you how we do that. So let's do that. And then we're going to do start date. So 4, 5, 4, and 5. And then this one is going to be column A. Now, instead of equals, we want to do greater than or equals to and less than or equals to. Now, the issue is we can't do it quite like this because this isn't how dates work in a query. And so what we have to do here is actually put date before our string. And the same thing here, date. But then it still doesn't work because it's telling us here invalid date literal is a number. Date literal should be a form year dash month dash day. And so what we need to do here is actually wrap these in text to convert them to what we need, which, as if you were paying attention, needs to be like this. And then we can do the same thing for this one, text. And now if we hit enter, now it's going to work. So if we delete this, you can see it has all the dates. If we pull this back in, so 6/1/2023, you can see now that's coming through. And then finally, to do our min and max, we can do a variation on our text here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this, Control Enter, and then let's go ahead and update these to our numbers. So 6 and 7. 6 and 7. We need to change this to F. And then this one to greater than or equals to and less than or equals to. And let's see what happens here. So if we hit an enter, nothing's coming up. And so what we have to do is actually get this out of the string, because these are numbers, not strings. And now if we hit enter, let's check this out. And so if we delete this min, for example, you can see that now it's working just as it was with the filter. Let's do 8,000. I can type correctly here, 8,000. 5,000, and you can see now it's working just as we expect. And if we delete one of these, now it'll bring in all the data. So we could delete all these, for example, and it's still going to work and bring in all of our data. Now, one more thing I want to look at here. So let's look at this sector. So on this sector, you can see we have different things here. So what if you want to be able to search instead of having to do exact match? So for example, you can see we have several ones here that match consumer. So what you can do in that regard is, let's say we can remove this rule for now, and we just want to use this as a search. So what we're going to do in this case then is, instead of d equals this one, we could do something like contains. And so then let's type in consumer. And if we look down here, you can see we have consumer services, non-durables, and durables. That's how you can do a quick search. Now, what if you want to be able to toggle back and forth? Well, first of all, if we change this to a drop down and bring this back in here, change that to arrow. So we can't type in consumer like this because it automatically changes it. So what we have to do here is change this, come down here and do just show a warning. And at this point, now if we do consumer, it allows us to do that. Now it gives us a little error there. And so we could do one of a couple things. You can make a different cell for that search. And at that point, then we do, let's just say that search sector. And we can put that here. One thing we could do as well is we can mark these with yellow to note where we can search. And we could do our search sector here. And at this point, we could change this back to reject input. And then the way we do this now is we change this back to equals. And then we'd add one more. We could do that right after this if we want, or down at the end. I'm just going to do Control Enter. And then I'm going to do here if E2 is blank. And here we'll do our contains. So now if we scroll this up, so if we select technology, for example, it shows up there, services, so forth. Now, if we do consumer over here, you can see it's doing a search. Now you could also make this search go on to the name, or if you had another field. And so just keep that in mind that this is very flexible. And so you can just add as many of these as you need. And just make sure that you reference the correct cell on both of these. You're referencing the correct column here. And that column is referring to the column here. So A, B, C, D, and so forth. And then make sure if it's text that you have these single quotes, and then you put double quotes inside, and then ampersands and that cell to refer to a specific cell that you're referring to. And if you're doing a number, make sure you get rid of those single quotes, and then dates obviously have to look like this. So you can make a copy of this Google Sheet from a link in the description below. Otherwise, that is it for today's video. So make sure to check out the other videos on our channel for more tutorials on both Google Sheets and AppScript. As always, have a great day.